Hello everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel. I am Jessica Henry. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. We are going to be painting from a photograph, a photo I took while I was in Ireland of some beautiful boats in the water. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I've had a lot of requests to paint some of these scenes, so we're going to jump in and get going on that. Painting today in oil paints, and I have a fan here in my studio blowing the fumes away because it's been starting to make me a little bit nauseous, so you might hear some background noise that way. Nothing I can do about it. And that's actually a really good point to make. If you do find that you are breathing in the fumes and you smell the strong smell with the oil paints, just put a fan next to your easel and just gently let it blow away, and you'll find that it's going to be a lot more helpful. So anyway, today I'm painting with my standard colors. I've got titanium white, cad yellow pale, medium, same thing, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, phthalo green way over here, and alizarin crimson. So I am going to be using a small bit of odorless mineral spirits just as I get going to lay in the design. Then I'm going to put a cover over my container because that's part of the problem. I'm breathing in this chemicals, and I don't want to do that anymore. It makes me nauseous. All right, and I'm also going to be using linseed oil. Again, I'm using just the liquid for when I travel because it makes the paint dry really fast, but linseed oil when I'm in the studio. And it's nicer too because it's closer to the ingredients of the paint itself. All right, so I'm going to be working from a photo. Again, this is linen 11 by 14, and we're going to work in oils. All right, let's jump in. Okay, so I've shown you a few of the images that I'm going to be using in today's demo. And so what I'm going to do first is begin with just outlining the composition on my canvas. I've toned it with a little bit of burnt sienna and yellow ochre and then rubbed it off a little bit. In fact, I did this yesterday, so it's dry today. And that's okay. Sometimes I like to have something that is completely complementary to the overall tone of the photo. And you noticed on the photo, it's mostly blues. So this beautiful golden orange as a complement to blue is going to show up sort of almost electrifying underneath some of that. So I think it should be kind of interesting. All right, so coming up with the composition, I liked the mountains in the first shot. So I'm going to use those as my backdrop for this scene right in here, and I will get to drawing those and show you how I'm going to work this out. Now you can always do a sketch on paper if you'd like to, and I often recommend doing a thumbnail sketch just because it makes your life a whole lot easier. Okay, so we've got this mountain. I'm going to start with this about here, maybe a little bit lower because I do like the sky in the second photo. So with the mountain here, that'll be the height of everything. So the land will come about like this, and then I'll put that cabin about here. So if I do the shore about like in this area, that rocky outcropping, I don't want it to be straight because you can get a painting too stripy. And then I'm going to position the boats in here, thinking about if I use those rocks in the foreground of the second picture, maybe some of it down this way, and I'll lead the viewer in coming up this way and then maybe back out this way through the clouds. So the cabin, the mountains, rocks. So if these rocks are going to help point us in this direction, I'm going to use some of this algae, seaweed stuff in here. The rocks coming like this. And so when you're taking a couple different photo references and you're rearranging a composition to make it your own, you have to really consider composition. And in this case, my photo, the rocks go all the way to the edge, and I don't want it being a stripe across. It would be lovely to me, I think, to have the rocks and the water being able to flow this way. It gives the boats a feeling of escape as well as the viewers. So we're going to leave that open and let the land come up this way. And so those mountains and land will be back this way a little bit, sort of framing this whole passage in. And that dark tree background will be there. And then the boats, we'll just put the boats in, I don't want them to be shooting us off the page, or off the painting. So let's put one, maybe that's too low. Let's put it back here. Let's put one like here, pointing that way. And we can do maybe another one pointing towards the house. And then I think I'll take one from the smaller, or from the other picture where there's a bunch of boats. I like how the one is turned towards us, so I think maybe that guy would be interesting if it was overlapping somehow. So I think I'll reverse it and put it right in here. Maybe I'll still allow water to flow through those two boats, so dropping this one down a little. That makes sense to me. But like that, this beautiful reflection we'll get in the water. So if that's that size, this is going to be, maybe I'll shave this one down a little. But you can play with things as you're going along, and I encourage you to do that too, just to help you, you know, think things through, plan ahead. What if? Is my favorite question in the studio. What if I did this? What if I did that? And you'll never know unless you continually search for those things you can discover and play with. So we're going to play with these rocks back this way, and these rocks will start to peek through the land this way. These are two in line with each other, so I'll pull this one back further. And there's that one with the red line on it. I don't want it to be too close to that rock wall because, again, it's sort of a compositional angst when you have two areas of interest too close together. So unless your intent is to have them overlap, and in this case it's not important to me that they overlap. This one. See how easy it is to just erase and move it over? It's really, all I'm marking them is just almost a dash. If I put this boat here and make it about that size, and I put this one toward us in the foreground, a little bit closer to us. I also want them to feel natural, not too labored over compositionally, like I gave it too much thought. You want it to feel like you just happened upon this scene and it was lovely. And okay, so then some of this algae in here will be part of my composition. All right, so I think that I have all the characters in place. Now I'm going to go through and work on the drawing of this whole scene. And I'll probably just stick with this other brush. Just sticking with this brush. So this is what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to be using my darkest areas of the composition for my to lead the eye. So I'm thinking about them in the context of composition. The eye is always drawn to the area of the greatest contrast. So these boats are an area of interest, but if I were to put this dark here and this dark here, our eye would, it's a stopping place. So I have to choose this dark or this dark. I want these to be a little darker because we need to shoot the eye up this way to the cabin, the little stone cottage. So I want this one to be a little less, but I want to bring the eye from these rocks, which are closest to us, these are going to have some strong dark shadows on them, pointing the eye up this way. And I don't want to be super obvious with my composition, but so we'll let some of this swirl and play in here, doing its job, like that. And then this is just going to be just suggested so that we don't get lost back in this composition back in here. So that can be a lot lighter in value than what's going on closer to us. And so now I don't want a lot of interest over here because it would shoot the eye off that way. So then let's make sure that these shadows of these rocks are not as dark. And they're reflected in the water. We'll kind of do that by this. That sort of puts us in the mental place of this is all reflection in here. So I want to think about this is going to have a little bit more value behind the cabin. I love that roof, but I don't want the cabin to be the first thing you notice, or the cottage. So I'm going to make the red of that roof a little bit less interesting so that we only see it secondarily. Like, this is the star. You always have to choose in your composition what will be the focal point and let everything else take its progression logically. 1, 2, 3. This background is going to be the third thing because we always like mountains and so forth. So if I made these mountains really detailed and with all kinds of interest, it would compete with the cottage. So you have to gauge that way and assess to how much attention you want to give something. And always be comparing it to your center of interest. Already I think the value for those mountains are getting a little bit too dark, so I dipped my brush in a little thinner and I just wiped some of that value off. I already have a value on my canvas, and that's a middle tone range, so I don't need this to be much darker. See, so if I dip my brush in the thinner, wipe it off, and erase some of yesterday's tone. If you wait too long than a day, then you wouldn't be able to do this. And if you're using acrylics, you wouldn't be able to do this either because it dries right away. But oils, you can kind of come back the next day and see now how dark that looks when I put a lighter next to it. So it's important to establish your most extreme values in the beginning. So I started with my darks and figuring out where those are going to sit on here. And now the next thing I'm doing is I want to figure out my lightest lights, my highest extremes. And some of those are on the rocks. And you don't have to get really detailed with your tonal study here. This really is more or less just for my compositional knowledge. In the water here, I have a light passage where it's reflecting the sky. I'm going to kind of rub out some of that tone just so that I have that understanding this is a lighter passage. And I want this to have a feeling that it's coming out at us. So I'll be playing with some of the colors and the swirls and all of that down there. I'll get some more of those rocks a little bit more accurate when I'm ready to. All right, back to this. Nice thin layer of color, and I'll get this mountain shape a little bit more accurate too as I go along. I don't really want that rising up that high, so we're going to make this all a little bit smaller. Make that more in the distance. Some of these far away hills are just the next value step in from those mountains. So that little cottage, the side of it is darker. Not that dark, but too dark. I'm going to let that blend into the dark of the background too. So just taking a little bit of that darker blue-brown mixture. Oh, I forgot to mention, I'm just using burnt sienna and ultramarine blue for this initial lay-in. Watching these very delicate stair-stepping of values in here. This land here, as it comes down to the water, has this wonderful up and down and play in the topography here, but over here it kind of levels out and gets a little flatter. And that's fine enough and sufficient for my initial lay-in. Time to jump in with some of that color. So I'm switching now. This was a synthetic size 4 just bristle brush, or synthetic bristle brush. Now I'm going to get to a hog's hair, and I like these for working through the actual pigment in the painting because it's stiffer, and so I'm able to pick up more. I'm going to put the lid on my thinner because I don't want to breathe this anymore. I have to keep it handy in case I want to clean my brush, but I may just end up using the linseed oil for cleaning my brush as well. So we'll put some in my little palette cup and jump in. Okay, taking some ultramarine blue, titanium white, and just painting those colors together. I don't want to just randomly grab a pile of blue and a pile of white and mix the whole thing together, because I don't know if I have enough blue or enough white, and so you just take a little bit of each and paint them together. And then if you need more, you just grab a little more blue, or if you need a little more white, just grab a little more white. But in doing it this way, you save on your paint. You don't use so much of it. I mean, we all know it's fairly expensive. So I'm putting this at the very top, this darker blue. And as I work my way down the canvas for the sky, I'm going to quickly begin to lighten my blue sky. And I'm just going crossways, this way, that way with the paint. I can always, if I want a really, really flat blue sky, I can come back through with the soft brush and just do some delicate little X's over it to keep it muted and quiet. But at the top of the sky, you'll notice it's more of a violet periwinkle blue. And then as you move down toward the horizon, it ends up being a little bit more cerulean, much lighter, kind of a warmer yellowy tone. And by warm, this is a great place to introduce warm and cool. Cool is having anything to do with blues, purples, some greens. That's the cool family. And then as you get closer to the horizon, when I mentioned warm, it's, if you can think about anything warm being like fire, orange, yellow, red, that's in the warm family. So as we get toward the horizon here, I'm going to start mixing a little bit of phthalo green with my blue pile here. That was a little bit too much of a jump, so I'm getting some phthalo, putting it right there in case I have too much. Let's see where I am. And I'm not worried about the clouds yet. I'll get those in a little bit. Now clouds, as they are further down the horizon, they do just the opposite of the sky. So the sky at the bottom of the horizon here is very warm, and but the clouds become almost purple. Now the clouds at the top of the sky, if you look straight up when you're outside and look at the clouds way up at the top, they will be warmer. They'll be picking up more of the sun and have sort of a yellowy tone to the clouds. So the clouds do exactly the opposite of what the sky is doing. Which is a handy thing to know to really make them pop from the background. So along here, I'm just gently lifting my brush as I go up into the darker color and letting the colors just sort of blend. I think due to the fact that the sky is really just flat and perfect, I may go through here and just soften this whole background before I put the clouds on, because putting the clouds over this heavily textured sky might just be really confusing, and I don't really want this to be distracting back here. Because this is not the star of the show. Okay, so now to blend that, I'm just setting this brush down and taking a clean, soft brush. Start with the dark color on top. And soft little X's. If I were to go down and do this way, by the time I'd get back up here, I'd have so much white on my brush from this lower passage that it would be mixing. And I really want to keep this to have a color purity that is just really special to this sky. Okay, now I can get into the middle tone light. And every now and then wipe your brush off, because the colors will get muddled and mixed with other colors. One thing that's hard to pick up from these videos is how often I'm wiping my brush on my paper towel. You just don't see that unless you're at one of my workshops and you're painting with me. But keeping your brush clean is one of the fastest and easiest ways to keep your colors from getting muddy. And so just always be having that handy. I think the paper towel is every bit an indispensable part of your painting experience as the brush itself. They are, I'm seeing them as alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, a little bit of white. Okay, now these are along the horizon, and like I said before, I'm going to use them as part of my composition. So I need to think about, I remember talking about it pointing this way, so maybe I won't put some in this area so that the eye can feel like it can escape. So whether it's water, I start with the sand underneath. clouds, I start with the shadows. Okay, so I just worked a little bit more on getting in some of these distant hills and lands back there, and going to pull out a little bit more of just a little contrast between these distant hills and these right up close. And this brush is a size 2 synthetic flat. I like it because it can get some nice chiseled edges. I don't want really sharp, strong edges back there, so I can just gently take my brush and do a little bit of that to alter an edge, just soften it a little. All right, so back to these rocks. I just put a few color notes in for some of the land that I had here, since I had some green and was working on this. Just really enjoying also getting some of these richer tones. It makes that passage look further back, so that you don't want to paint distant things too brilliant in color and value. Let them go back a little more. I think I'm still going to paint this passage in here a little lighter, just so that it has more of a sense of being behind this, because the values are too close. Okay, so just by doing that, created this illusion of this passage being behind this. Now I'm in this area, I'm going to paint these trees a nice strong dark to separate themselves even more from that whole area back there. There's not a lot of trees over here, but there is a value separation, which is important. I'm also kind of sort of thinking about keeping it a little bit plein air-esque, so it has sort of that feeling of being like a plein air painting. the sky and I worked from that color and then pieces at a time, that color and then this color. I'm doing the water in the same way. I'm working on this passage here that is this lighter tone, and then there's a part that it gets a little bit darker in value, and then there's all the seaweed down below. So I'm kind of blocking in these chunks where I'm seeing those different alterations in color and value. Now, as the water gets shallower, there's less of it, so you see more of the sand coming through. So I'm going to take a little bit more yellow ochre, maybe some cad yellow, and some of this green, and make a very light green as the sand comes up in here. And it just makes it feel like the water is more shallow here. Always starting from the bottom up when working with sand or water. Go from the sand on the bottom on up to the through the water, paint the color that the water is, and then you put the ripples and things on top. Now everything that is reflected down in the water is going to be lighter or darker in the water than what it is reflecting. Okay, so for the boats, I'm just taking a dark blue and brown, just the ultramarine blue, and I'm just simply going to block in the shape, and I'll come back in through it with the highlights and colors.